Well, we got 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the November 8th general midterm election. And one of the things that I think is going to be watched across the country is who's going to control the U.S. House. We've got a race here in central Illinois that could very much help determine who is going to control the U.S. House. The 13th Congressional District, newly drawn district, there's no incumbent. And State House Democrats drew that to include parts of the Metro East St. Louis area, and then going up into the Springfield area, grabbing some of that, the Decatur area, grabbing some of that, and I believe Champaign-Urbana as well. So it kind of traverses a lot of the state in a thin district, a thin, elongated district. And some indications are that they did that because they want to be able to control that seat. Now, the Democrats, of course, have been in control of the Illinois State House for several decades with supermajorities, and it's led to increased population decline to where we even have one fewer seat in Congress than we did these past 10 years. So that's obviously an issue that's in front of voters. Is should we support the same policies that led to that, or is there a change needed? And even when it comes to the impact of Illinois across the entire country with who controls Congress, the 13th district I think is going to be one of those really closely watched districts. And in particular, you've got a fascinating storyline between the Republican, Regan Deering, winning out, I think like there were 3 or 4 different candidates in the Republican primary. Regan Deering wins that primary. Nikki Budzinski, I think, had 2 or 3 candidates in the Democrat primary. She won that primary, but a most recent article from the Better Government Association raises substantial questions about Nikki Budzinski and the consultant work that she had. So yesterday, Regan Deering, alongside U.S. Representative Rodney Davis and State Representative Avery Bourne, they took to a podium at the Illinois State Capitol to share some of their concerns with Nikki Budzinski and her consultant work that she has previously had. So here's Regan Deering sharing some of her thoughts about a recent Better Government Association article highlighting Nikki Budzinski's consultant work.
The recent reports of cronyism we've seen about my opponent profiting from her government services concerning, but not surprising. Nikki Budzinski has a record of putting politics over people. From the graduated income tax to CEJA to massive spending packages that directly has led to inflation, Nikki Budzinski has been making life more expensive for Illinois families. This is why these reports of her using loopholes to avoid the revolving door and cash in on her influence, including being paid by a lobbyist who she gave inside access to while in the governor's office, are so concerning. She has been named in multiple indictments and was heavily covered as receiving former indicted Speaker Mike Madigan's list of political hires. While there may not be any official laws broken yet, she always seems to be just outside the door of corruption. Her hypocrisy is alarming. She pretends to want dark money out of politics, but a quarter of her campaign is funded by special interest groups outside of our district, some of whom she once worked for. Voters and Illinoisans are exhausted from pay-to-play politics and the tax and spend policies that have come with it. I may not have the savviness of a millionaire political consultant, but that's okay because I'm providing an alternative to this machine politics and power at all costs. While in Congress, I will support stronger ethics and policies that help people, not politicians. These will include exact opposites of the massive pork-infused spending that my opponent recommended and implemented for the Biden administration, and experts say directly led to our current inflation. I'll try and improve our economic climate that has wiped out retirement savings and made Social Security checks worth less for those of our seniors living on a fixed income. I will support policies to reduce taxes and inflation, increase American energy production, and make politicians and special interest groups less, not more, powerful. Even with millions of dollars being spent to attack me, I believe the voters will see they have a clear choice this November. I will fight to help increase economic opportunities for our district, not myself.
So again, that's Regan Deering talking about a recent article the Better Government Association put together about Nikki Budzinski's consultant work. And if you have a chance, you should probably read this because it's kind of fascinating, especially kind of outlining Budzinski's career. She made more than $320,000 working for then candidate for governor J.B. Pritzker, then went to the Pritzker administration as a senior aide, and she's one of those that was paid double, not just by taxpayers, but also by the governor. Then after leaving that office, the Better Government Association indicates that in the private sector, she got paid more than $500,000 from labor organizations, a Democrat group that doesn't disclose donors, which some call dark money, and a consultant firm. And she is now facing questions about this. We'll get to a statement from Nikki Budzinski here in a moment, but Regan Deering, the Republican, had Republican State Representative Avery Bourne there to talk about the questions surrounding all of the ethical issues from that BGA article and what it ultimately exposed.
You know, I think what struck a lot of people when they read this story is that in your gut, it feels like there should be laws protecting against this kind of behavior that we've seen with her consulting, leaving the governor's office, making $500,000 in 10 months. It feels like it should be illegal. And then the cynical side of you pops up and says, well, maybe it's only legal in Illinois. But it turns out there are guardrails for this kind of behavior in Illinois. And when Nikki Budzinski responded to this story, her response actually left me with more questions than answers. Her response was basically, I never lobbied, which she seems to be alluding to the executive order that's in place that doesn't allow for people to leave the governor's administration and go and lobby. But there are guardrails beyond that. You know, she seems to be talking about the executive order, but it also says in the executive order, you can't just not lobby, you also cannot negotiate for employment or compensation with a lobbyist or a lobbying entity while you're still employed by the governor's office. But if you look at the timeline, Budzinski announced she was leaving to start the firm Budzinski and Partners LLC in February of 2020 before she left the governor's office. And so there are serious questions now that we know she worked for a lobbying firm. Was she in communication with a lobbying firm before she left the governor's office? Additionally, there are state provisions in law in the State Officials and Employees Ethics Act that states that a state employee who was involved in awarding contracts of $25,000 or more to a company during their final year of employment may not go and work for that company for 1 year after leaving office. Now, Budzinski was Pritzker's senior advisor. In the story, it talks about how she spent, a lot of time in these senior offices, in these senior meetings, participating at a really high level. She needs to disclose whether or not her position as senior advisor for the Pritzker administration was one where she was involved with handing out contracts. Does this part of state statute apply to her? She needs to disclose that, especially since she brags about her position being one where she worked on gaming expansion, one where she worked on broadband expansion, all things that are regulatory and involve giving out contracts and grants.
So again, that's State Representative Avery Bourne raising substantial questions after the publication of this BGA article. And yesterday I asked Regan Deering, there's a lot of talk about revolving doors and lobbyists versus consultants, and why should voters care about this? What is it specifically that voters really need to take away from this story and the Republicans' criticism of the Democrat in this race?
Voters should care because elected representatives are supposed to represent the people and not themselves. And she is clearly a political insider that is using her position to further her career. She moved directly back to this district to run for office, as Congressman Davis said, before the ink was even dry on these maps. I never went looking for a political career, but as a citizen in Illinois 13, I know that my priorities are very similar to everyone that we're meeting in this district. And they want to know that you're running for the right reasons, you don't have a political agenda, and this country is begging for common sense and real-world representatives to go to Washington and work for them.
So, again, this is a criticism that the Republican candidate for the 13th Congressional District has for the Democratic candidate. And I reached out to Budzinski's campaign to get a statement very similar to what they had for the BGA. Budzinski did not get interviewed, refused to interview for the BGA article about her consultant contracting. But you do have this statement that the Budzinski campaign sent saying, Regan is desperately trying to distract voters from the fact that last week she said she wanted seniors to sacrifice their hard-earned Social Security and Medicare. This is a last-ditch effort by a flailing campaign to change the narrative away from the issues that voters really care about, the campaign said. Went on to say that Nikki has always taken state and federal ethics laws very seriously and will continue to do so if elected to Congress. She's proud to work for so many different issues where she stood up for working people and advocated for causes that she cares about. While in state government, Nikki had no involvement in the state's contract procurement process. After Nikki left government, she was never a lobbyist, never registered as a state or federal lobbyist, and she complied with all ethics laws. So again, that's the response from the Budzinski campaign from yesterday's news conference. I want to hear your reaction at 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Hey, good morning, Greg.
Hey.
Hey, does anyone else see the irony that you've got two Rauner people standing up helping Regan Deering about ethics? I mean, I think it's kind of comical.
Elaborate a bit on that if you could. Are you...
I'm sorry, Irvin. Avery Bourne with Irvin. I apologize. Avery Bourne with Irvin, which was backed by the Browner, and the Browner team actually ran her campaign, along with Rodney Davis, who also the Browner team had him as executive director of the party, and also supported his campagin.
I'm not sure. So I don't quite understand. Like, what's the connection you're trying to make here? Browner bad? Is that?
Basically, I think people should know that the Browner campaign is now supporting Deering. Yeah, I think it's bad.
Okay, so that's what you wanted to. So you're saying that the Rauner people, Rauner who hasn't been in office and doesn't even live in Illinois anymore, from my understanding.
Yep, absolutely. But his team does. So have a good day.
All right, I appreciate the call. I'm still not sure what that has to do with the facts that BGA put out there about Budzinski getting $500,000 in consulting contracts for. Anyways, all right. So, yeah, obviously an interesting issue that here we are now 2 weeks before the election. We'll see how all this